What would you do if you were hiking out in the middle of nowhere and your partner that's guiding you through the trail vanishes out of thin air? No screams, no trace, just gone in the blink of an eye. That's what happened in this week's case. Hi guys, I'm your host Emily, and welcome back to Turn Your Lights On. It's day 2 of Crimemas, where I'll be posting some variation of true crime content for you every day until Christmas. Whether that be here on YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, or Instagram. I'm going to be bringing you guys new and exciting content all month long, so make sure you grab a blanket, throw some wood on the fire, and most importantly, turn your lights on. Bear Creek Overlook is a gorgeous trail located in Montana. It has beautiful sights and is a seemingly well-maintained trail that's easy to follow. According to alltrails.com, it has a 4.8 rating with stunning views. But one of the most memorable things about Bear Creek Overlook Trail is what happened on July 18th, 2007. Around 1:30 p.m., Barbara Bolick and Jim Raymaker hadn't arrived back from the trail where the two had set off to hike. With Barbara leading the reins, they were sure to have a pleasant and adventurous hike. However, Donna, Jim's girlfriend, quickly grew concerned. It had been hours since Barbara and Jim left, but Carl, Barbara's husband, still had no signs of fear. Before I continue, let me explain everyone's relation to one another, because during my research, it seemed a little wordy and possibly confusing, so I want to put that into perspective for you guys first. Carl and Barbara are married, Jim and Donna are dating, and Carl and Donna are cousins. That's how they all know each other, and that's why Donna is quick to express her concerns of Barbara and Jim's slow return to Carl. Carl showed lack of concern with the delayed return of Barbara and Jim because Barbara was a seasoned veteran when it came to hiking. She was an avid hiker and wanted to show Jim around her favorite spot that she knew like the back of her hand. Bear Creek Overlook was between a 2 to 3 mile hike each way and approximately 20 miles from Carl and Barbara's home. So the fact that Barbara and Jim had only been gone for a couple of hours didn't concern Carl much. Not until around 2:30 p.m., when Donna really began to panic, did this fear slowly start to set in for Carl. She was insisting on Carl calling and reporting Jim and Barbara missing. But before Carl could make a call, the phone rings. Carl reaches for the phone, and when he answers, it's clear that he doesn't recognize the voice on the other end of the line. It was in fact a Forest Service officer, and she was calling to tell Carl that Barbara has been reported missing. And just as you suspect, Carl hops in the car and heads to the trail. Upon his arrival there are already quite a few people there investigating, but to Carl's surprise, Jim's there too. So if Jim's there, but Barbara's not, where's Barbara? Now, many people have theories on what had actually happened because the rest of the story comes directly out of the mouth of Jim. Jim tells authorities and Carl that when he and Barbara had left for their hike, they'd actually been stopped because where Barbara would usually park was blocked off for construction that was due to take place later that day. So they had to park a little further down the trail than where Barbara usually would. And the first half of their hike was a breeze. They parked the car, hiked a little further than usual to get to the entrance of the trail, walked the first half, and made it to the overlook. They enjoyed the scenic view for 30 to 45 minutes and had something to eat while they were resting. Absolutely no problems throughout the first half of their hike. And when it was time to head back down the path, Barbara once again took the lead so that she could direct Jim back to their car. Jim says they kept a steady pace and that Barbara was about 20 to 30 feet in front of him the entire time. He took his eyes off of her for maybe 45 seconds to turn around and admire the view once more before continuing their hike back. However, when Jim turned back to follow Barbara's lead, she was gone. Vanished in 45 seconds without a trace. At first, he kind of shrugged it off and figured she probably hadn't realized he stopped to get one final glance at the overlook. and she continued her way back down the trailhead by the construction site. So Jim continued on his way, descending down the trail until he got to the construction site. Still, no Barbara. He asked around to see if any of the workers had seen her, but no luck. The only people the construction workers had seen since the beginning of their workday were two young men with a black and white dog, but they had been exiting the trail almost an hour earlier than Jim had been. Jim and one of the workers decided to walk back to the car to check and see if Barbara had arrived back safely. But once again, no Barbara. And this is where the panic really began to set in. Jim decided to hike back up the trail because this wasn't a trail that someone would easily get lost on, especially not Barbara, who knew it like the back of her hand. It takes Jim around an hour to get up the trail and back down again in search of Barbara. He's yelling her name, looking out for anything that may seem out of place or suspicious to him, but still no Barbara. At this point, Jim has searched the entire trail on foot without any trace of her. This is where he confronts the Forest Service officers and officially reports Barbara is missing. This is where we come back to the call that Carl had received and him arriving to the trail. The search begins, and they decide in order to get whatever information they can about what's going on, they need to try and find these two men who were, besides the construction crew, seemingly the only other people on the trail that day. However, the only information they had on these men was that they were two younger men, had a black and white dog that they let the construction workers pet, and possibly drove an SUV that was parked next to Jim's while they were hiking. So not really much to work with at all. They turn their attention back to Barbara and do everything they can to locate her. Within the first 48 hours, there isn't any record-breaking discoveries. Carl, of course, wasn't eager to leave the hiking trail without his wife and suggested staying until they found Barbara, but those investigating knew it was best if he got rest and came back the next day with a more level head and clear mind. So that's exactly what Carl did. And on day 2, he came back with more support for the search. At this point, helicopters and dogs were being brought in, but nothing. No clues, no scents get picked up on, no footprints found, absolutely nothing. With no leads and no evidence that Barbara was ever even at the trail in the first place, investigators turned their heads back to the young men that were on the trail that day to try and find some answers. Jim had told Carl and investigators that they had briefly crossed paths with the young gentleman at one point, and he and Barbara had had a quick conversation with them in passing. So if they could find these men, they could at least verify that Barbara had in fact made it to the trail that day. The two guys, unfortunately, have yet to come forward to this day, even though they had never been identified as possible suspects. But without a motive and any evidence to prove that Jim had any involvement in the disappearance of Barbara, they rule him out as a suspect as well. Barbara Bolick went missing at 55 years old. She was leading Jim through the trail when her hiking companion turned and admired the view for one final time, only to turn around to never see Barbara again. In just 45 seconds, a woman vanished out of thin air, never to return. Since this is a case that is still open, it comes with the territory that there are, of course, theories. And since there isn't much evidence in this case to support any theories, and it was a rather short case to research, I do want to share some of these theories with you guys, and of course, share the devil's advocate along with it. Theory 1 is, of course, wildlife. They were hiking after all. Barbara was very safe and carried a gun with her hiking, so yes, it is possible she was attacked by an animal and wasn't able to get her gun out in time, but there would be signs on the trail that she was attacked. At the bare minimum, if she was only 20 to 30 feet in front of Jim, he would hear her scream. The next theory is that Donna knew that Jim was planning on doing something to Barbara, and that's why she was so nervous and panicky from the get-go. But Donna and Jim were from California, and Barbara was showing Jim around the area, not vice versa. This was Barbara's home turf, so how would he have had time to plot something so sinister? The final most common theory I found is that Barbara possibly just fell off the edge of the cliff, because why would Jim lie about something that could deliberately turn around and prove everything he said to be incorrect? Why would he say anything at all to investigators about the two men speaking to him and Barbara and seeing them when he had no way of knowing whether or not they would resurface again? And we know these two men were there because numerous construction workers verified this as well. However, on the flip side, some think that Jim may have possibly only known about these men because the construction workers described them to him when they were telling him they hadn't seen Barbara that day and had only seen the two younger men with the black and white dog. These are some of the most common theories that I found surrounding this case. So that wraps up this episode in the case of Barbara Bolick. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and theories on this case. As always, my sources will be linked down below. Make sure to tune in all month for Crime Miss, every day until Christmas. I'll be uploading content for you guys on various platforms such as Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram via live streams, mini-series, and of course, our weekly episodes. I have a lot planned for you guys this month, so make sure you follow, subscribe, tune in, and turn your lights on.